Hey guys, going to review a few new releases at the moment, because I have a decent amount to say about these last two films I saw over the weekend. So let me start by talking about the newest animated film on Netflix, The Sea Beast. The Sea Beast was an animated film that wasn't quite high on my radar, but I was fairly intrigued by it. It hadn't gotten a huge marketing push, so I feel like it hasn't been as much on the radar for most people, which is an absolute shame because this is actually a really good animated film that I think deserves to be checked out. The premise is about a gang of pirates whose main job in life is to protect their kingdom from a bunch of terrifying sea monsters. However, after bringing in a young girl to join their adventure, they may discover that these creatures they deemed as threats may not be all what they seem to be. What works about this story is that for an animated film that's essentially geared towards kids, this ends up playing like a legitimate fun adventure film that does take itself seriously and has a decent amount of stakes to it. It certainly has its charm that can easily entertain kids with cute and funny moments, but more often than not, you're enthralled with this story being told here because of how much more mature it feels as an animated film. It is one of the few recent animated films I can think of that actually warrants a PG rating. It gets a little violent with a lot more action, there's a tiny bit of blood, it doesn't shy away from more darker themes, and even has some mild swearing in the mix. Yet it feels tonally consistent, making you really take this journey seriously, as it doesn't overkill itself with jokes and doesn't have anything that feels too out of place. There's no pop songs, no modern day references or talk, just a lot of really neat set pieces and some compelling characters. What helps is that from an animation perspective, this is absolutely gorgeous, as not only are the backgrounds visually stunning in practically every frame, but this has got to be some of the best character designs I've seen in an animated film of this caliber in quite some time. Every single character, big or small, has a distinct and unique look to them. And even as characters themselves, they all stand out in their own way, with the main two leads being very charismatic and having a great arc to them as a whole. One minor downside I will say is that while I was really getting into it in the beginning, I'll admit the middle section does go on a bit slower. Not in a bad way, but it's the part of the movie that feels most like it's trying to be a standard buddy adventure film with the two leads, which is something we've definitely seen before. It is only a slight disappointment because the film sets itself up as this great adventure film with a lot of different characters that I kind of wish you got to see some of them a bit more than you do, and I wish you got to know them a little bit more as well. However, that is all forgiven once you get to the third act of this film, which I must say, this is an excellent finale that really does a great job settling in the message of the film. It does go in a similar direction of films like How to Train Your Dragon, where the characters realize that maybe the threat they've been dealing with for so many years might be less threatening than they thought. Where it works though is that it makes it very clear that maybe even if your past and history does have some good elements to them and the people who might have been a part of it were still ultimately good people, their history and what they knew at the time might have been easily misguided than what it actually is. The best summary of it is in the film itself, with an excellent line that summarizes the theme of the movie perfectly. I won't spoil it for those who haven't seen it yet, but I'll just say it's a line that deals with heroes and mistakes of the past. It really settles this movie in as a really well done animated film that I definitely recommend checking out. Hopefully word of mouth will give this film a bigger push, because we need more unique animated films that really do more with their storytelling. A film with mature themes and an engaging adventure is something that shouldn't go unnoticed, especially within the realm of animation. So take that for what it's worth. And I'm gonna give The Sea Beast a 9 out of 10. The other film I saw over the past week was Thor: Love and Thunder. Like with most Marvel movies post Endgame, I was mildly interested in Thor: Love and Thunder, but not necessarily hyped. There were definitely things that were worth of interest with the new Thor, as Taika Waititi was set to return in the directing chair, and to his credit, he did quite an excellent job with Thor Ragnarok. Not to mention having the Guardians of the Galaxy in the mix, and also Christian Bale definitely caught my eye. Though, I have to say, I don't think this movie was that great. Taika, what happened? This is definitely a downgrade from what was given in Thor Ragnarok. That said, it's far from the weakest Marvel movie. Hell, it's not even the worst Thor movie, but it feels like there was a lot more that could have been executed better. Instead of it feeling like a proper follow-up to Thor Ragnarok, it feels more like what that movie would have been if it was more alongside the quality of the other Thor movies. Let's at least start with the good, because I'll at least give this film some props for having a decent start. The film does start with some really decent action and some neat designs in terms of aliens and characters that you do still see a tiny bit sprinkled throughout the movie. It sets up for a really fun time, and even prior to then, the film has a really good setup thanks to one of the aspects I was really looking forward to that ended up living up to my expectations. That being Christian Bale. Even taking my love for Bale's Batman trilogy out of it, I always found him to be a very great actor who has a ton of charisma and a ton of dedication to his roles. And here it's no exception. I was interested to see how he would play as more of a straight up traditional bad guy in this, and he does a great job playing off being threatening and even humorous at a few points in a very villainous way. Plus his whole backstory is pretty intriguing and even has a nice conclusion to it by the very end. In fact, the conclusion in general is a decent end to the Thor saga and not necessarily a bad way to end the Thor series as a whole. Where the film suffers is practically most of the middle section of the film. An issue that Marvel has had for a while is that sometimes they can get a little overboard with some of their humor, where their films tend to be constant joke fest to the point where you don't feel like there's much at stake or to care if anyone's kinda just quipping 24/7 with jokes that aren't all that funny. Thor Ragnarok worked because that film had genuinely clever writing where it was actually funny, and it had jokes that didn't feel completely pandering to their audience. They definitely try to go on the humor from that film, but its jokes don't land that hard at all for me, with a few minor exceptions. Even Korg, who was my favorite character in Thor Ragnarok, isn't even that funny this time around, cause it feels too much and not as well implemented. Though it's still better use of Taika Waititi than how he was in Free Guy. I can tell when this movie was going to go downhill, as there's a bit that they tried to recreate that was a highlight in Ragnarok, and not only was it much funnier in that movie, but it also didn't help that sequence also had what I ultimately think is what Ursula in the live action Little Mermaid remake is going to be like. Yeah, definitely not looking forward to that guaranteed shit show. And my god, if I have to see a movie with a screaming goat gag one more time, I swear to god, this movie officially killed that joke for good. Plus, let's be real, that joke was really at its peak when it appeared in Muppets Haunted Mansion. And even then, it was kinda overused. Just stop with the screaming goats! We had enough of them already! Outside of the jokes not landing, the movie's narrative isn't all that interesting. It strives to be kind of a romantic comedy, which isn't necessarily a horrible idea, and to their credit, Natalie Portman and Chris Hemsworth still do a fine job, but because of the lackluster writing and the not too well fleshed out characters, it doesn't stand out that well. While the action does have its moments, the effects are kinda all over the place, with some of them being good, some of them being standard, and some of them being kinda bad if I'm being totally honest. Hearing more about the crunch time Marvel movies have been having as of late, I really hope they can get away from that and make their VFX artists take more time and effort with the look of their films, cause some of the effects really needed some work on them. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the Guardians of the Galaxy's glorified cameo in this movie, which they're fine in this, but they're not in it enough to make it a selling point of the movie. I mean, I didn't expect them to be in it that much, admittedly, but seeing how much potential there was with Thor working with the Guardians of the Galaxy, they should have done more with what they did with them. It's a shame this turned out not that great in my opinion, because there are a few elements that make it relatively enjoyable, but it's not enough to make the film. And honestly, I felt there have been plenty of better Marvel films that still did a decent job expanding upon the universe, despite despite my neutral feelings on them post-Endgame. This doesn't make me that much more excited for future Marvel movies, admittedly. Certainly doesn't make me want to see Black Panther 2 much more. Then again, I wasn't really interested in seeing that to begin with, because, come on, it's way too soon after Chadwick's passing, man. This is by no means the worst Marvel movie, like I said, but I just wish the film was all around better, especially given the talent involved with this. Taika Waititi is still a very funny and creative mind when it comes to his films, and I'll still check out whatever original project he might have after this. The man has done some great movies, and I'm sure he'll continue with more. It might be a situation where Disney wanted him to play up some elements too much to the point where his style felt overbearing, but I can see it being toned back better in another Jojo Rabbit type film. Bottom line, if you're interested in Thor: Love and Thunder, it's not the worst thing you can see from the MCU, and you might find some enjoyment to it, but if you're on the fence about it after the mixed reception, I say maybe wait for Disney Plus with this one. All I'll say now is that when it comes to Marvel's future work, please make sure James Gunn ends his Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy on a high note. I'm gonna give Thor: Love and Thunder a 5 out of 10. So yeah, what did you guys think of these movies if you've seen them yet? Definitely check out the Sea Beast for sure, and I will see you guys again next time. Later, guys.
And your name is? I'm Thor. You're Thor? Well, it hurts. Once again, this whole broadcast has been brought to you by Sand. It's everywhere. Get used to it.